Year 5 and Year 6. I'm going to read Chapter 3 and Chapter 4 of Warhorse today. I hope you enjoyed reading the start of the book with me yesterday. Just to recap, we were introduced to a horse called Joey yesterday. Joey was bought at auction by Albert's father, and he has just been trained how to plough and be used as a workhorse. And right at the end of Chapter 2, we learned that World War I had just been declared and announced to the people of Great Britain. So we're now going to pick up from where we left off and read Chapter 3. Gradually during that last summer on the farm, so gradually that I hardly noticed it, Albert had begun riding me out over the farm to check the sheep. Old Zoe would follow along behind, and I would stop every now and then to be sure she was still with us. I do not even remember the first time he put a saddle on me, but at some time he must have done so, for by the time war was declared that summer, Albert was riding me out to the sheep each morning and almost every evening after his work. I came to know every lane in the parish, every whispering oak tree and every banging gate. We would splash through the stream under innocent copse and thunder up ferny peace beyond. With Albert riding me, there was no hanging on the reins, no jerking on the bit in my mouth, but always a gentle squeeze with the knees and a touch with his heels was enough to tell me what he wanted of me. I think he could have ridden me even without that, so well did we come to understand each other. Whenever he was not talking to me, he would whistle or sing all the time, and that seemed somehow to reassure me. The war hardly touched us on the farm to start with. With more straw still to turn and stack for the winter, old Zoe and I were led out every morning early into the fields to work. To our great relief, Albert had now taken over most of the horsework on the farm, leaving his father to see to the pigs and the bullocks, to check the sheep and to mend fences and dig the ditches around the farm, so that we scarcely saw him for more than a few minutes each day. Yet, in spite of the normality of the routine, there was a growing tension on the farm, and I began to feel an acute sense of foreboding. There would be long and heated exchanges in the yard, sometimes between Albert's father and mother, but more often, strangely enough, between Albert and his mother. You mustn't blame him, Albert, she said one morning, turning on him angrily outside the stable door. He did it all for you, you know. When Lord Denton offered to sell him the farm 10 years ago, he took out the mortgage so that you'd have a farm of your own when you grow up. And it's the mortgage that worries him sick and makes him drink. So, if he isn't himself from time to time, you've no call to keep on about him. He's not as well as he used to be, and he can't put in the work on the farm like he used to. He's over 50, you know. Children don't think of their fathers as being old or young. And it's the war too. The war worries him, Albert. He's worried prices will be falling back, and I think in his heart of hearts he feels he should be soldiering in France. But he's too old for that. You've got to try and understand him, Albert. He deserves that much. You don't drink, Mother, Albert replied vehemently, and you've got worries just like he has. And anyway, if you did drink, you wouldn't get me as he does. I do all the work I can, and more, and still he never stops complaining that this isn't done and that isn't done. He complains every time I take Joey out in the evening. He doesn't even want me to go off bell ringing once a week. It's not reasonable, Mother. I know that, Albert, his mother said more gently now, taking his hand in both of hers, but you must try to see the good in him. He's a good man, he really is. You remember him that way, don't you? Yes, Mother, I remember him like that, Albert acknowledged. But if only he wouldn't keep on about Joey as he does. After all, Joey works for his living now, and he has to have time off to enjoy himself, just as I do. Of course, dear, she said, taking his elbow and walking him up towards the farmhouse. But you know how he feels about Joey, don't you? He brought him in a fit of pique and has regretted it ever since. As he says, we really only need one horse for the farm work, and that horse of yours eats our money. That's what worries him. Farmers and horses, it's always the same. My father was like it too, but he'll come round if you're kind with him. I know he will. But Albert and his father scarcely spoke to each other any more these days, and Albert's mother was used more and more by both as a go-between, as a negotiator. It was on a Wednesday morning, with the war but a few weeks old, that Albert's mother was again arbitrating between them in the yard outside. As usual, Albert's father had come home drunk from the market the night before. He said he had forgotten to take back the saddleback ball that they had borrowed to serve the sows and gilts. He had told Albert to do it, but Albert had objected strongly, and an argument was brewing. Albert's father said that he had business to attend to, and Albert maintained he had the stables to clean out. "Won't take you but half an hour, dear, to drive the ball back down to the valley to Thursden," Albert's mother said swiftly, trying to soften the inevitable. "All right then," Albert conceded, as he always did when his mother intervened, for he hated to upset her. "I'll do it for you, mother, but only on the condition I can take Joey out this evening. I want to hunt him this winter, and I want him to get fit." Albert's father stayed silent and thin-lipped, and I noticed then that he was looking straight at me. Albert turned, patted me gently on the nose, picked up a stick from the pile of lightings up against the woodshed, and made his way down towards the piggery. A few minutes later, I saw him driving the great black and white ball out down the farm track towards the lane. I called out after him, but he didn't turn around. Now, if Albert's father came into the stable at all, it was always to lead out old Zoe. He left me alone these days. He would throw a saddle onto Zoe out in the yard and ride out onto the hills above the farmhouse to check the sheep. So it was nothing special when he came into the stable that morning and led Zoe out. But when he came back into the stable afterwards and began to sweet-talk me and held out a bucket of sweet-smelling oats, I was immediately suspicious. But the oats and my own inquisitiveness overcame my better judgment, and he was able to slip a halter over my head before I could pull away. His voice, however, was unusually gentle and kind as he tightened the halter and reached out slowly to stroke my neck. "You'll be all right, old son," he said softly. "You'll be all right. They'll look after you, promised they would. And I need the money, Joey. I need the money bad." So that's chapter 3. It looks like he's going to sell poor Joey. Let's find out what happens next in chapter 4. Tying a long rope to the halter, he walked me out of the stable. I went with him because Zoe was out there looking back over her shoulder at me, and I was always happy to go anywhere and with anyone as long as she was with me. All the while I noticed that Albert's father was speaking in a hushed voice and looking around him like a thief. He must have known that I would follow old Zoe, for he roped me up to her saddle and led us both quietly out of the yard, down the track, and over the bridge. Once in the lane, he mounted Zoe swiftly, and we trotted up the hill and into the village. He never spoke a word to either of us. I knew the road well, of course, for I had been there often enough with Albert, and indeed I loved going there because there was always other horses to meet and people to see. It was in the village only a short time before that I had met my first motor car outside the post office and had stiffened with fear as it rattled past, but I had soon steadied, and I remember that Albert had made a great fuss of me after that. But now, as we neared the village, I could see that several motor cars were parked up around the green, and there was a greater gathering of men and horses than I'd ever seen. Excited as I was, I remember that a sense of deep apprehension came over me as we trotted up into the village. There were men in khaki uniforms everywhere, and then, as Albert's family dismounted and led us up past the church towards the green, a military band struck up a rousing, pounding march. The pulse of the great bass drum beat out through the village, and there were children everywhere, some marching up and down with broomsticks over their shoulders, and some leaning out of windows waving flags. As we approached the flagpole in the centre of the green, where the Union Jack hung limp in the sun against the white pole, an officer pushed through the crowd towards us. He was tall and elegant in his joppers and Sam Brown belt, with a silver sword at his side. He shook Albert's father by the hand. "I told you I'd come, Captain Nichols, sir," said Albert's father. "It's because I need the money, you understand. Wouldn't part with a horse like this unless I had to." "Well, farmer," said the officer, nodding his appreciation as he looked me over, "I thought you'd be exaggerating when we talked in the George last evening. Finest horse in the parish, you said. But then everyone says that. But this one is different. I can see that." And he smoothed my neck gently and scratched me behind my ears. Both his hand and his voice were kind, and I did not shrink away from him. "You're right, farmer. He'd make a fine mount for any regiment, and we'd be proud to have him. I wouldn't mind using him myself. No, I wouldn't mind at all. If he turns out to be all he looks, then he'd suit me well enough. Fine-looking animal, no question about it." £40 you'll pay me, Captain Nichols, like you promised yesterday?" Albert's father said in a voice that was unnaturally low, almost as he did not want to be heard by anyone else. "I can't let him go for a penny less. Man's got to live." "That's what I promised you last evening, farmer," Captain Nichols said, opening my mouth and examining my teeth. "He's a fine young horse, strong neck, sloping shoulder, straight fetlocks. Done much work, has he? Hunted him out yet, have you?" "My son rides him out every day," said Albert's father. "Goes like a racer, jumps like a hunter, as he tells me." "Well," said the officer, "as long as our vet passes him as fit and sound in wind and limb, you'll have your £40, as we agreed." "I can't be long, sir," Albert's father said, glancing back over his shoulder. "I have to get back. I have my work to see to." "Well, we're busy recruiting in the village as well as buying," said the officer, "but we'll be as quick as we can for you. True, there are lots more good men volunteers than there are good horses in these parts, and the vet doesn't have to examine the men, does he? You'll wait here. I'll only be a few minutes." Captain Nichols led me away through the archway opposite the public house and into a large garden, beyond where there were men in white coats and a uniformed clerk sitting down at a table making notes. I thought I heard old Zoe calling after me, so I shouted back to reassure her, but I felt no fear at this moment. I was too interested in what was going on around me. The officer talked to me gently as we walked away, so I went along, almost eagerly. The vet, a small, bustling man with a bushy black moustache, prodded me all over, lifted each of my feet to examine them, which I objected to, and then peered into my eyes and my mouth, sniffing at my breath. Then I was trotted around and around the garden before he pronounced me a perfect specimen. "Sound as a bell, fit for anything, cavalry or artillery," were the words he used. "No splints, no curbs, good feet and teeth. Buy him, Captain," he said. "He's a good one." I was led back to Albert's father, who took the offered notes from Captain Nichols, stuffing them quickly into his trouser pocket. "You'll look after him, sir," he said. "You'll see he comes to no harm. My son's very fond of him, you see." He reached out and brushed my nose with his hand. There were tears filling his eyes. At that moment, he became almost like a likeable man. "You'll be all right, old son," he whispered to me. "You won't understand, and neither will Albert. But unless I sell you, I can't keep up with the mortgage, and we'll lose the farm. I've treated you bad. I've treated everyone bad. I know it, and I'm sorry for it." And he walked away from me, leading Zoe behind him. His head was lowered, and he looked suddenly a shrunken man. It was then that I fully realised I was being abandoned, and I began to neigh, a high-pitched cry of pain and anxiety that shrieked out through the village. Even old Zoe, obedient and placid as she always was, stopped and would not be moved on no matter how hard Albert's father pulled her. She turned and tossed up her head and shouted her farewell, but her cries became weaker, and she was finally dragged away and out of my sight. Kind hands tried to contain me and to console me, but I was unconsolable. I had just about given up all hope when I saw my Albert running up towards me through the crowd, his face red with exertion. The band had stopped playing, and the entire village looked on as he came up to me and put his arms around my neck. "He sold him, hasn't he?" said quietly, looking up at Captain Nichols, who was holding me. "Joey is my horse. He's my horse, and he always will be, no matter who buys him. I can't stop my father from selling him, but if Joey goes with you, I go. I want to join up and stay with him." "You've the right spirit for a soldier, young man," said the officer, taking off his peaked cap and wiping his brow with the back of his hand. He had black curly hair and a kind, open look on his face. "You've got the spirit, but you haven't the years. You're too young, and you know it. 17's the youngest we take. Come back in a year or so, and then we'll see." "I look 17, Albert said, almost pleading. "I'm bigger than most 17-year-olds. But even as he spoke, he could see he was getting nowhere. "You won't take me then, sir, not even as a stable boy. I'll do anything, anything." "What's your name, young man?" Captain Nichols asked. "Narracott, sir. Albert Narracott." "Well, Mr. Narracott, I'm sorry I can't help you." The officer shook his head and replaced his cap. "I'm sorry, young man, regulations. But don't you worry about your Joey. I shall take good care of him until you're ready to join us. You've done a fine job on him. You should be proud of him. He's a fine, fine horse. But your father needed the money for the farm, and a farm won't run without money. You must know that. I like your spirit, so when you're old enough, You must come and join the yeomanry. We shall need men like you, and it will be a long war, I fear, longer than people think. Mention my name, I'm Captain Nichols, and I'd be proud to have you with us." "There's no way then?" Albert asked. "There's nothing I can do?" "Nothing," said Captain Nichols. "Your horse belongs to the army now, and you're too young to join up. Don't you worry, we'll look after him. I'll take personal care of him, and that's a promise." Albert wriggled my nose for me, as he often did, and stroked my ears. He was trying to smile, but could not. "I'll find you again, you old silly," he said quietly. "Wherever you are, I'll find you, Joey. Take good care of him, please, sir, till I find him again. There's not another horse like him, not in the whole world. You'll find that out. Say you promise." "I promise," said Captain Nichols. "I'll do everything I can." And Albert turned and went away through the crowd until I could see him no more. Oh no, we've been separated. That's the end of chapter 4, and we're going to read the next 2 chapters tomorrow.